Right. Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, August 21st, 2018 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we'll call roll. And let me remind commissioners, please be sure your microphone is lighted and speak into the microphone for the record. Commissioner Wiggins.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie. Commissioner Crane. Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Meiske.
Present.
Commissioner Urquia.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow.
Present.
And Commissioner Faulkner is present. We do have a quorum this evening. No personal appearances scheduled. One item on the consent agenda, approval of minutes from our July 17th, 2018 meeting. And unless any of the commissioners have concerns about the minutes, I would either entertain a motion
So moved.
accept consent agenda or accept the minutes of the July 17th, 2018 meeting. Please go ahead.
So moved.
Second.
Y'all got ahead of me. Motion by Commissioner Urquia, second by Commissioner Wiggins. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in favor, 7 in favor, none opposed, and no abstentions. And nothing this evening under unfinished business, so we will move directly into new business. Case 18015, TB Hanna Station Site Plan, and Mr. Grass or Mr. Cataret, is one of you presenting for the city?
I would first call on our Director of Parks, Mr. Mustine, to make a presentation on the application.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. We wanted to present the site plan for TB Hanna Station. This is one of the parks that we've, over the course of time, we have acquired the property to develop the entire city block. And if you will remember the April 2016 GO bond, that voters approved overwhelmingly, over 80% approval rate to develop this particular piece of property. So over the past year, we have worked with consultant CFS engineers to help design and work towards basically what we're bringing here tonight. This particular site plan has gone through the park board. It is now before you to review. I'm here to answer any questions. What we have is the complete city block. If you aren't aware of where it's at, is directly behind the First Baptist Church. It's enclosed by Maple Street, Adams, Olive, and Maple, Adams, Olive, and Washington. Yes, sir. Thank you. Mm-hmm. There's the address is Washington. So this property originally was already owned by the city. If those of you that have been in town a long time will remember the original, or the Public Works facility where the police office was there for a long time. That particular building was demolished in 2005. We created the Farmers Market, and that is the site where the Farmers Market is. In 2015, we built the shelter, what we call the depot there, and it kind of enhanced the programming. In 2016 and 2017, respectively, we bought the western half of the block in 2 different parcels and completed the city block, and now before you is our proposal for development of that park. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to go through a complete overview of what the improvements are, but at this time we're here for you to to ask anything that you need to know.
Any questions from commission? I'll start with one. So, not sure quite how to refer to it, but with reference to the
That,
proposed site plan,
yeah, we call that the master plan.
master plan, would you mind a brief review of what is already there versus what is to be added?
Yes, sir. Okay, so on the eastern side, if you look, which would be, if you're looking at the map, it's the part that shows the depot and the farmer's market area.
Right.
That is the area that's already developed. We have picnic tables already out there. As a matter of fact, right now, the farmer's market's wrapping up for the evening. It's every Tuesday night at that location. The depot is a shelter that was dedicated 2 or 3 years ago. It is available for rentals, and we use it for special events. The mayor's tree lighting is at that area as well. The part that is new is the, what I'll call the northwest corner, where what you see is the spray ground in that area. That piece of property was purchased from the First Baptist Church in 2016, and we immediately, there was a house and a shed, and we immediately demolished that and leveled the property, and it's just currently grass. The part where you see the playground and the station house, we purchased that as a city. We purchased that from a private owner in 2017. That is as it was when we purchased it. What we call the old post office, where it's back in the 60s and the 70s and into the 80s, that facility was the post office for the city. That is still there. We have full intentions of renovating that and using it, but the property remains as it was when we purchased it. All the city has done to this point is just maintain, mow the grass, and just upkeep. So that is the property and overview of the property.
Okay, so up to now, there have not been restroom facilities on that park?
Correct. Right now, we have the porta pots there that we keep throughout the summer season because of the farmers market on a weekly basis.
Okay, so this takes that up to a new level.
This will ultimately develop the entire park with restrooms, with water, walking trails, the spray ground, a playground. This will make this a very unique park in the original town area, and something that's desperately needed for that side of town.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could, Nathan, could you please explain the modification to TB Hanna in order to make it an ice rink?
Yes. So as part of the GeoBond project, one of the things the voters identified was an ice rink. We wanted some type of winter activity. Originally, the plan was to do kind of an overlay with the spray ground being an ice rink on top of the spray ground, so we could convert that. And when we began investigating that, it really was not cost effective for us. It was way more than we could afford to do. So as staff, we began researching other ways to bring that ice rink, which is something that we promised, so we were obligated to do that. One of the things that we wanted to do was look at the depot, which is the shelter. It's really a facility that's used from about April to November, and then it's done for the year. So we wanted to find a way to make that a facility that we could use year-round. So we began investigating other ice rinks, things that can be portable and brought in underneath that, so that we can shut off the parking lot and make that a facility where we can use it for special events, but it also can be rented privately for winter birthday parties, things of that nature, other special events in the winter. That's how we got towards the synthetic ice idea, is because that is a portable system that we can place onto the concrete. It's already a level surface, so we eliminated a lot of cost by already having that facility there, and it made the synthetic ice rink a very affordable option, and something that we could, like I just said, we could turn that facility around, and it now becomes a 12-month facility instead of really a 6-month facility. What's exciting about this is that was the direction we were headed in turning that into a synthetic ice rink. Underneath the shelter, we would take all the tables and chairs out into the parking lot, close off the gates, and that really became a gathering spot in the wintertime when weather is favorable. Since this, I've been able to talk to some other vendors. I found an actual opportunity for a real portable ice rink. So it's real ice that's a portable system that we, instead of being synthetic, it's much more conducive to skating. It's a lot more fun. There's just a difference between being synthetic ice, which is basically plastic with a thin layer of oil. The skates work on it. It's just a little tougher, but it gets the job done, as opposed to real ice. And what we think is that this is an affordable option too. So once the approval process tonight goes forth, we'll prepare the documents and the scope of work to bid both out and see what kind of pricing we get, and have the option of real ice. And at that time, we'll take it to the park board and back to the council and let those bodies make that decision. But the conversion of the depot makes it a unique facility that, so far what we've seen in the metro area, nobody else really has a covered ice rink, an outdoor ice rink. There are a couple uncovered outdoor ice rinks. Lee Summit just built one that is a little bit larger, but it's not covered. It's just out there. Gladstone has a synthetic one right next to in their downtown area, but it's not covered as well. So we feel like with the lighting that we built in there, that we can really make this a unique facility, attractive to rent and also for our own use from special events.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Meiske?
I have a question. What about parking?
Parking,
I mean,
excellent question.
You've got some parking spots identified for handicap, but,
Yes.
you know, if you're going to have an ice rink there, I mean, you could have 15, 20, 25 cars.
Yes. Right now, the parking, if you look on West Maple, there's some pull-in, angled-in parking. That is currently there. Part of our 5-year CIP plan with the park board is to complete the entire block with that angle parking and add that in. That's really all the space we have for, because we are landlocked in terms of property. What we also do right now is, in terms of a gentleman's agreement with the First Baptist Church, we do share parking. They have very large parking lots right there. We exchange services. They use the depot for some of their events. We use parking. What we would like to do, and we've already been talking with a couple of the pastors with the church, is formalize that agreement for that shared use. So there's something in place that's more solid than just us talking and being good neighbors. But that is the intent, is to go ahead and complete. You don't see that on this master plan, but it is in phase 2, and I believe it's funded in FY22 in the Parks master plan, or the Parks CIP.
Well, but if you're having the parking on Maple, and then if you're going to go on Adams and have parking, are we going to have sidewalks that connect it to the ice? I mean, you're talking middle of winter time, snow
Yes.
out there. You don't want everybody tracking through the snow, the grass and all, getting to the ice rink.
If you look on the master plan, there is a trail system within there. That trail system, it doesn't really show, keep in mind, this is a rendering, so when we actually put it in place, that trail will connect with the parking areas and make it accessible. By code, it has to have that connectivity. So we'll make sure that that's done.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Commissioner Pfizer?
Will this ice rink be available for just the public to use at any time, or is it a specific event kind of place?
At this time, we're actually considering both. It'll be open play, just like a tennis court, just like the skateboard park. It'll just be open play. If you have your own skates, you can just go out and use it. But there will be times where it's programmed, where we'll have the concession stand open. We'll have skates that you can rent if you don't have your own. So it'll be both.
Okay.
We will not staff it all the time like we would, say, Centerview or the RAC facility, but it will have programmed hours on Friday nights, Saturday mornings or something during the winter time, to where there's scheduled time for the public to come and rent skates and have a formalized program.
Okay.
Who do you envision staffing the concession stand?
That'll be internal through our Parks Department. We have a large pool of concession staff at our ball fields and our youth and our adult leagues and stuff.
Okay.
We'll just schedule them into there.
So it won't, as far as we know, it won't be staffed by a volunteer organization that's using it as a fundraiser or something.
That would be a special use permit. If, say, the church wanted to come in or the Boy Scouts wanted to come in, that would be a special use permit that we do internally within the department.
There's an option to do that then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Shall we let Mr. Mustine sit down for a minute?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, staff? Mr. Catarat or Mr. Gress, do you have a staff report for us on the case?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Mustine did a good job of covering a lot of the information included on the site plan, so I'll just try and hit some of the highlights here of the staff report. As you mentioned, we're here this evening to discuss site plan approval for TB Hanna Station Park, which is located in the original town of Raymore. I've included an aerial photograph of the property as well as several images looking from all four streets that surround the site. So you can see on page 2, you can see kind of what the depot looks like there looking from Maple Street. And then moving on to page 3, you can see the old former post office building that Nate was talking about that will eventually be converted into that station house that will house a lot of the equipment associated with the park. And then the last picture on page 4 shows the depot as it sits today. You can kind of start to envision what a skating rink or ice rink might look underneath there in the future. The property is currently zoned appropriate for the use. It is a PR, Parks, Recreation, and Public Use District, and the future land use map identifies this area as appropriate for public use. Because tonight, site plans do not require advertisements for a public hearing, there was no advertisement for tonight's meeting. Staff did outline the requirements for site plan review and has submitted a handful of comments for your consideration. Mr. Mustine kind of touched on the history of the property, but as he mentioned, we've been kind of acquiring properties piece by piece in order to assemble this park over the last couple of years. The eastern half was previously used at the old Public Works facility, and then over the last couple of years, we purchased the other 2 remaining corners of the park to maintain ownership of the entire city block. And if you think back, I believe it was last year, the entire city block was rezoned from C1 neighborhood commercial on the east side and R1 single family on the west side. It was rezoned entirely to a PR, Parks, Recreation, and Public Use District. The engineering department has reviewed the site plan and does recommend approval of this application. And staff has submitted several comments regarding the application itself for your consideration. Staff proposed findings of fact regarding the application were also submitted with several pieces of information. Looking at the review, the Planning Commission does have final approval over this application, so the final decision of approval will be made this evening. Overall, staff does recommend approval of the application. As Mr. Mustine stated, it will kind of fully bring this park to the next level. There's a lot of activity that goes on there currently with the farmers market and several other private events that happen in the depot. So adding the restroom facilities, potable water, and several different amenities will kind of elevate this park to a whole different level. It'll be a great asset for the community. So staff does recommend approval of the application. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, Mr. Mustine is still in the audience, and I'm sure he can answer several questions better than I would be able to. So that would conclude staff report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gress. Questions, comments, discussion from the commission? Yeah. All right, let's roll. Commissioner Wiggins.
I say no reason to hold this up. I move that we approve case 18015 TB Hanna Station Park site plan, subject to the 10 conditions provided by staff in their report.
I'll second.
Okay, right. And Mr. Zur? Okay, I was wondering if we needed to accept proposed findings of fact, but
Did you accept the conditions?
I'm sorry.
Subject to the conditions?
I don't.
Subject to the 10 conditions was my.
Right. I don't
Then we
think
probably
I
should add
heard.
findings of fact.
I don't think I heard the phrase "accept staff proposed findings of fact." I think everything after that was fine.
So then I move that we approve case 18015 TB Hanna Station Park site plan, including the findings of fact and the following, the 10 conditions provided by staff recommendation. Is that good enough?
I like that better.
That good?
Commissioner
I'll second
Meiske.
that. Okay.
Okay, sorry, not to be too nitpicky. Is there any discussion on the motion? And seeing none, all those in favor, okay, I'll restate it. So motion on the floor by Commissioner Wiggins, second by Commissioner Meiske, to accept staff proposed findings of fact on case 18015, TB Hannah Station site plan. And, right, approve the case subject to the 10 conditions. Something, okay. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Thank you very much. And Mr. Mustine, thank you very much. Nice presentation. Can you pull that chair out of the way? Thank you. Sorry, it's blocking my view there. I'd see a mysterious hand rise from the dark. And the remaining item on new business this evening is a discussion item on sidewalk requirements. Mr. Gress.
Thank you again, sir. If you think back to our previous meeting where we discussed the 28th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, there was a series of proposed amendments within that staff report. 2 of those, however, were left out for further discussion, and those were the proposed requirements or changes to the requirements for sidewalk on local and residential streets within the city. So staff has been working on some additional research that the commission directed us to perform. We wanted to use tonight as an opportunity to bring that information forward and continue the discussion on the willingness of staff and the commission to move this forward and potentially change the requirement for local sidewalk on local streets from 4 foot to 5 foot as a standard. So included in the staff or in the packet, you'll find a draft of the bill and the ordinance that the language would occur in and that change would take place. And then moving on, one of the research items that staff conducted previously, it actually was unfortunately just not shared with you all at our previous meeting, was research on different cities around the metro that either have sidewalk requirements of 5 foot or something different. So staff compared 12 different cities from around the area and got a kind of a mix of different standards from what those cities have. We compared 12 cities. Of those, 7 of them have a standard of 5 foot for all sidewalks, and 5 of them, similar to Raymore, have a current standard of 4 foot. There were a couple that were mixed in there that have, varying by street type, but even within that, the minimum width was still 5 feet and goes up to as much as 10 or 12 feet in some scenarios. So the results were kind of all over the board, but interesting enough, there are several cities that have moved forward with increasing the width of sidewalks along all roadways to 5 feet. In addition to that, one of the items that we discussed at our last meeting was the potential cost increase for increasing the width of sidewalks. And I think the way it was phrased last time, it's a little bit confusing to understand how that cost would be increased with the potential increase in width, because the way sidewalk is typically quoted is by the square foot. And as you know, if you're adding an additional foot to your sidewalk, you're obviously increasing the square footage of that sidewalk. However, in our research, it shows that there's really no increased labor that's associated with a 4 foot sidewalk versus a 5 foot. It's really the only increase in material. And it takes no more equipment or concrete forms to make that. It's simply pushing those forms out 6 inches either way and adding a foot onto the sidewalk. But seeing that in a square foot cost, there was really no way to delineate an increase in material for the sidewalk, but not an increase in the labor. So what staff did was convert those estimates into a linear foot. So you have your linear foot cost for a 4 foot sidewalk versus your linear cost for a 5 foot sidewalk. And so what you'll see in the chart there is that while you're increasing the amount of material by 25%, the bulk of that cost that would be increased would really only come from the material, which is relatively cheap in comparison to the labor that's associated with installing sidewalks. So you can see overall between a 5-foot sidewalk and a 4-foot sidewalk, the only increase is about 8.5%, 8.6% almost. And in talking back and forth with Mr. Rokos, kind of another way to look at that, for a standard lot, the difference between, being a 75-foot frontage, the difference in the amount of concrete that it would take to do a 4-foot sidewalk, 75 linear feet at about 4 inches thick versus a 5-foot sidewalk at the same thickness is about 1 cubic yard of concrete. And if you look up a price of concrete, just a quick Google search will show you that it's $99 to $100 a cubic yard. So really that's the only increase that you're going to be seeing is that, $100, maybe a little bit more to cover, whatever those costs might be. But in our research, it just shows that although you're increasing the width by 25%, that's not directly associated with a 25% increase in cost overall. And that's fairly standard, I believe, across city to city. The other comment I think concern that the commission had last time was the prices that we were using were based on the quotes that the city had received to install sidewalk on lots throughout the city. And in my mind, the way I was looking at that, it might have been a little bit cheaper because when we go through the city, we have, sometimes, 3 or 4 lots or sometimes more than that we install concrete on. So you would think intuitively that you're buying in bulk, so you would get a much larger discount. However, the way Mr. Rokos kind of explained it to us is that, when the city bids out a project, we have maintenance bonds. We require the concrete to be tested. There's a whole nother level of requirements that the city has versus an individual lot owner who can just hire essentially any contractor that he would like to install that sidewalk. So the likelihood is that it actually would be a little bit cheaper for the resident to install the sidewalk themselves versus having the city go in and install that on their behalf. So we've done a lot of research. I hope we've addressed a lot of the questions that you all had at our last meeting. But certainly if you have any additional questions, myself, Mr. Carteret, Mr. Rokos would be happy to answer those for you. But I think the next step in here would be getting a formal either a yes or a no from the commission directing us to either move forward with a formal amendment to bring back to you all at a later date, or maybe this is something we're just, like I said, we're just not ready to move forward at this time.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Grass. Comments I did reread from a month ago in reviewing the minutes, so I assume that's fairly fresh on everybody's mind, only a month old. Commissioner Meiske.
Okay. I know Mr. Cataract has seen my house. When I bought the house, my sidewalk went up to my property line and stopped. The house next door to me was on a corner lot and did not have a sidewalk. I don't know how many situations there are in the city of Raymore, but if we pass this at 5 foot, my sidewalk is 4 foot. You're going to mandate that the next sidewalk that comes up to it will be 5 foot? You see what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but.
Absolutely, and the way this would be phrased in the ordinance is that it would be tied to any plats approved after a certain date. So the lots in your neighborhood were obviously approved several years ago, and so if sidewalk were to occur on that corner lot where there isn't a sidewalk, we would approve a 4-foot sidewalk, just because it would be awkward to transition from
Right.
4 foot
Okay,
to a
so
5 foot.
we don't have to worry about the provisions in this to cover situations like that.
Correct.
Okay.
Kind of following along with that, in older neighborhoods developed a long time ago, as far as we know, do nearly all of the residential neighborhoods in Raymore have a final plat for the subdivision, or do we have situations where, I'm trying to think, where it's not necessarily a subdivision but individual, and I'm thinking acre on up, larger lots, estate lots. Do we have situations where that's not exactly a subdivision, but it's individual plats as it was developed lot by lot or random?
What's that subdivision over there by Morning View? Across Lucy Webb.
Skyview?
Skyview Estates.
But there's
the
several
larger lots.
There's several
Okay.
different areas in Skyview. I know the newer. I would suspect Skyview was developed as a subdivision. I'm thinking, and I'm trying to remember if
I don't
it's...
think there's many sidewalks over there.
Yeah, well, I'm actually thinking as you go on east of J Highway on the north side, past Dr. Carroll's property, there's individual houses in there, and they might be exempt under the 3-acre rule too. But I'm just kind of wondering, I think, you know, as we get out from Old Town Raymore or big subdivisions, you know, Madison Creek, Madison Valley, Cumberland Hills, those were undoubtedly platted as a subdivision. I'm just wondering how much random, like individual lots, and I think for the most part you answered a concern of mine for Commissioner Meiske, but I'm just kind of wondering how we read that residential subdivision with final plat recorded.
Yes.
Sorry, you're the lawyer.
And just to clarify, the lots that you're speaking about along 58 there and kind of J Highway on the east side of town, those are already platted. They were platted as kind of a larger estate lots in and of themselves. There's a couple in there that are maybe 3 or 4 lots together.
Oh, okay.
But you're correct in that a lot of those lots were kind of platted as one larger
Right.
estate lot, if you will, but they have been platted.
Well, and that brings to mind another question. I really need to stop digging this hole deeper, but it's kind of like, well, if we did a replat, you know, combine 2 lots or do a lot split, does that trigger the date?
That would not trigger the requirement. There really are very few areas of the city that are unplatted,
Really?
truly unplatted.
Good.
Commissioner Armstrong happens to live in one of them along North Madison Street. There's some unplatted lots
I
along
was sure
there.
we had them, I just was not sure how frequent that was.
It's very rare.
Very rare.
Original town, we don't require the sidewalks in, which is all, well, even though the original plat for the city, but very few areas. I don't know if there's other language we could perhaps look at adding to address your concern with
Yeah.
that.
Mr. Zer?
They'd all still be subject to the potential for variance as well, too. So each one of these individual lots
Yeah.
that came in, if they were to plat a lot, they could come in and request a variance from this particular one by saying, the lot on one side of me is 4 feet, the lot on the other side of me has 4 feet.
Right.
It doesn't make sense for us not to have a 4 foot. I think that would be a justification for
Okay.
a variance request.
Yeah, I agree with you that that would be an option. It just, you know, that adds another layer of complexity.
Does the community development department have the ability to vary that at any degree within internally?
We do, but not enough for the foot.
Not for the foot? Okay, sorry.
While we're thinking about this, any other questions from commission? Okay. Well, I have 3. I was hoping somebody else would ask, but, okay, so, Mr. Grass, put your salesman's hat on. I'm a tough customer. Question 1 is really, what is special about 5 as compared to 4? What does the extra foot really buy us in the mainstream?
Very good question. The biggest benefit that we found in our research between a 4-foot sidewalk and a 5-foot sidewalk is just the comfortability factor that a pedestrian can have, whether they're walking by themselves or side by side, more importantly, with one other person. Not to mention if you're pushing a stroller or if you're in a wheelchair, that extra foot gives you the ability to turn around safely if you have to turn around and go in the opposite direction for whatever reason. It allows 2 people to walk side by side comfortably without bumping elbows with each other. And it really brings us more in line with the more of a national standard of this is where a lot of communities are moving to, is with the 5-foot standard because of those reasons of pedestrian safety and accessibility and comfortability, and the ADA compliance of having a wheelchair, giving them the ability to make that turn on a 5-foot sidewalk.
Yeah, I noticed, and by the way, if I haven't said it already, thank you very much for the research. I found it was very detailed. My impression was, yeah, it's about a 50-50 split, 4 versus 5. And of course, as Mr. Cataret pointed out at the last discussion, we do require 5 on arterials and collectors. So it's not entirely foreign. There was a comment, I guess it was Shawnee, talked about wheelchair passing zones at intervals of 200 feet where the sidewalks are less than 5 feet wide. And so, yeah, that brought home a point, made sense. What about bicycles on sidewalks? I mean, I don't even know. I haven't looked. What are Raymore's requirements on bicycles? Street, sidewalk, either?
Bicycles, I believe by law, are prohibited from riding on the sidewalk. However, I'm sure you've seen it throughout the community. There's a lot of cyclists who do ride on the sidewalk, either because they're not comfortable in the street or where there would be facilities, there's just too much traffic and they don't feel comfortable.
Yeah. To me, there's a big difference between, somebody that's out doing the MS 150 on a $1,000 bike versus 5 or 6 year old kid on a little bike starting off, and I guess I really wouldn't feel terribly comfortable with them in the street, but again, it makes a difference. I can't imagine denying kids the thrill of going as fast as they can straight at each other to see which one gives first. Sorry. That was a long time ago, but okay. Well, okay, so I guess that kind of brought to mind also, I mean, I really do like Raymore for at least one reason, simply because it's a very walkable community. We have runners, we have walkers. There are parts of the trail system that I've never been on, but the parts that I do see, and frankly, the sidewalk along 58 Highway is a great asset to the community. Walkers, runners there, and gets well used. I'm thinking, with a 4-foot, obviously passing with stroller, passing with a wheelchair, sometimes you see a double wide stroller going one way. The frequency of use on the sidewalks, if it was heavy like 58 Highway, I'd be a little more concerned about it. It's kind of random. I'm thinking, well, common courtesy, I think we still have a lot of that in Raymore. Just simply step aside, or there'll be a walkway teeing off or something where people can pass even with 4, but I guess that wasn't really a question for you, sorry. The third question, I guess I'm wondering, so, I think I mentioned before, as we've gone year by year, raised the bar, sign code, being a very clear example. We've worked on that for years, and I think, it's been gradual, but we've certainly improved the appearance of Raymore. So my question really was, what are the consequences of not enacting the ordinance this year? Are we going to miss a major opportunity and kick ourselves later, or if we wait another year, keep the current requirement of 4-foot minimum in the subdivisions? What do you think are the consequences?
I don't necessarily think there are any consequences to not adopting the ordinance. I believe one downside would be I don't want to say wasted time, but bringing this back. I mean, there's really no new information or research that's going to, come about that will, make this a better idea or a worse idea. I think it's just whether we need to decide if this is something that we want to support and jump on board with, or is it something that just really doesn't have that much benefit for Raymore? Walkers are just fine walking on the 4-foot sidewalk as it is, and maybe the 1 foot doesn't have that much of added value to it. I just don't. There's not a lot of benefit to kind of rehashing old conversations back and forth, because the only thing that's really going to change year by year is really the price of concrete. And as I mentioned, that's the one thing that's really going to have the biggest effect, would be that that tiny or 8.5% increase. So that, I believe, would be the only thing that would be really a missed mark, is that the data that we've presented to you all this evening is current and of this year. Whereas if we, push this out 1 or 2 years, there could be more cities that have 5-foot sidewalks, or there could be the same amount. But I really don't see any downsides to either adopting it or not adopting it.
Very unlikely that other cities will make the sidewalk requirement smaller. Clearly that. I tend to agree with you. You know, if I had a crystal ball, I'd look ahead to next year and see how this research and chart had changed, you know, have other cities gone wider. Does this tie in with like a walkable cities designation or something like that? Is that a criteria?
It's not necessarily a criteria in order to obtain that, but it's definitely something that they look very closely at. And it was a recommendation on both of the report cards that we received back from walk-friendly communities, which we applied for 2 years ago and then this past year as well.
Okay, and we still haven't gotten the designation?
No, we have not. We are working towards applying, I believe, to at their next application window,
Right.
which is towards the end of this year.
Again, I guess I should know when to stop shoveling outside of the recommendation to bump it up from 4 to 5 foot minimum in the residential neighborhoods. Were there any other recommendations from them that stood out that caused us not to get that designation already?
I don't believe there were any more that were necessarily more important or less important than this one, but there were several things that they suggested that we continue to work on. One of the things was continuing our, I don't want to say ADA transition plan, but continuing to monitor and repair the defects of the sidewalks that we currently have, sidewalk ramps and things of that nature.
Yeah, well, the work in the city, which I'm sure Mr. Rokos is intimately familiar with, but you know, that's been very visible, and I see us making a lot of progress there. Those are 5-foot sidewalks for the most part? 5 foot already with the ramps?
With the, which ones are you talking about?
Well, I guess the visible to me are the ones along 58 Highway. Those
Correct, the
are
arterials are 5-foot sidewalks.
5-footers. Where else are we doing a lot of ADA ramp work?
It's just, it varies to wherever we have work that a ramp is broken. So
Okay.
we travel into residential neighborhoods and subdivisions to do that type of work.
Okay, so there's more going on than I see on 58.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Good to know.
Could I,
Mayor Turnbow.
Jim, on all the circle, has that got 4 or 5-foot sidewalks on it? I think they're 4-foot sidewalks, and we've done like half a dozen ADA compliant replacements on the circle here.
Right here.
Correct. That's on the inside.
Yeah.
It's 4 foot. The outside is 10 foot. I think it's 10 foot.
10 foot wide?
Sidewalk?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the loop that goes on the outside ring is a 10 foot.
okay.
The inside ring's a 4 foot.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Not sure I realized that.
So in front of Centerview is a 10? Oh, no. Where's that trust? Trust your engineer. Other commissioners, comments? I've kind of monopolized that for a minute. I'll set my shovel aside. He wins? He wins. Okay, good to know. I mean, I'm thinking, I don't want to necessarily buttonhole anybody, but I'm thinking, you know, short of a formal motion, Mr. Zur, you can try to keep me honest, short of a formal motion, I just do a straw poll and say commissioner by commissioner, leave it as is for now, or request staff to
I don't mind starting off.
bring it back to us again. Mayor Turnbow.
You know, I've kind of looked this over from several angles, and I'm definitely in favor of Section 1, which relates to the striking of the 1 foot from to the on the property line adjacent. Those two items under Section 1 certainly I think are appropriate. But when you get down to the 4 or 5 foot sidewalk, I've not yet heard as a compelling reason for us to put an additional burden, which I think it will be on our developers. I already hear from developers that they sometimes kind of cringe doing business out here. Now there are those that aren't shy about it. They come out here and they make pretty good money developing. But if you were to talk about attracting new developers to this area, they might shy away because they haven't been able to negotiate our minefields that we have here with regard to the difficulty, and not the difficulty, but also us holding their feet to higher standards. I just don't hear a compelling reason to move to the 5 foot at this time. So I would have a tendency to vote yes for section 1, but probably no on section 2. That's just my 2 cents worth. Just to start the conversation.
No, that's good. If you don't mind, I'll just kind of move on down the road. Commissioner Urquio, what are your thoughts?
I would echo the mayor on section 1. I'd be okay with that. On section 2, my other question, kind of relaying to what has been discussed, is looking at Raymore as a whole. How much or how many different areas, or if we were to say a % of the city that would fall under this requirement if we were to expand it from 4 to 5 that hasn't been developed? We talking about 10% of the city? We talking about 20? 50%? What percentage of the city are we talking about? Because if we're talking about something less than 10%, then to the point of, call it symmetry or just overall flow of consistency, that would sway my vote one way or the other.
I'm trying to
2 comments. At this time, as we reported before, we're only 50% built out of our current land area. So we're 17 square miles, but only 50% of the land mass in our city is developed. So half of it still would come forward with developing, but actually on top of that, our major subdivisions, Creekmore and the Good Ranch, although existing phases that have already been started wouldn't fall under this, the new phases would. So there would be transition for the new developments phases, so it's actually a little bit more than 50% when you take in.
And that
those
actually was one of the things that bothered me about lack of symmetry, was mixing. Yeah, enough said.
Right. No, and I would agree. But okay, thank you. Then in that case, I would be, lack of a better word, indifferent. If there was a motion for, I would be fine with supporting that. If the majority was, I wouldn't lose any sleep if we went one way or the other.
Good. Commissioner Fizer.
I kind of like the idea of the 5 foot sidewalks. I know my daughter and I walk a lot at night, and we have 4 foot sidewalks, and we're not even big people, but it's like, we have to get out of the way if someone's coming, and if we're taking our dogs, we kind of have to go in single file. So I think, I'm not worried about the symmetry. I don't think there's going to be like some strange transition. So I'm kind of for it.
Okay. That's 3 feet from. Oh.
6 inches on each side.
Well, I know. Depends how you look at it, but yeah. So when the motorcycle passes. Commissioner Wiggins.
I guess indifferent is also kind of a good word for me. And, I've definitely pushed back against this. I went back and pulled all of my change orders from when I constructed my house a little over 5 years ago. And, first of all, I really do appreciate the information from the other cities and requesting the, showing the 8.57% difference. I imagine if a homeowner if a homeowner pushes back on the concrete provider or their builder, I'm sure they could get them to break it down to it's just the materials. Mine was very, very clear, 200 linear feet, 4 square foot, 1,000 total feet. It was $1 per square foot. Right. And I would imagine, unless you have a smart homeowner or a courteous builder, more than likely those costs would probably just go ahead and, instead of let's do the 8.5%, it's it's 5 linear feet at 6 1/4, or sorry, 5 square feet at 6 1/4, boom, get hit with the the extra 25% increase to 8.5. So obviously that's a potential downfall of this, and I looked at mine, and in 2013 I paid $4 a square foot, and it was many thousands of dollars, and I can't imagine it's 6 1/4, 6.5 now. That's a big bill, and that Mayor made a comment about the developer, obviously in a commercial space, but those are arterials and stuff. But this is a residential, and I don't know any builder who is nice enough to provide a sidewalk for their customer. They turn that around on the the customer themselves. So obviously there is some cost there, which makes me hesitant, but you know, ADA recommendations are 5 foot. So I kind of go back and forth. I know I probably talk about this way too much, but you know, if it's for the good of the people and that's what the people would want to make it more walkability, more friendly, I'm all for it. But at the same time, I'm cautious to the additional costs that will be incurred by the citizens, because when the city goes in and puts in sidewalks where somebody doesn't have one, it gets charged to the homeowner or the developer, which gets sent on. So the cost in the end of this ends up in the burden and the shoulders of the residents and the citizens of this community, which I think we also have to be cautious of, because that's kind of who we're here to help support and work for.
Yeah. Commissioner Armstrong?
I guess I'm on much the same situation. Portion 1 is fine, and I would support that strongly. The second section, although I appreciate your effort in getting more information, and that was helpful, and I did some of the research myself and found some of the same feedback about the clay soils that had been mentioned at the last meeting. I still have questions about runoff that I was not able to find answers for, and I didn't hear anything in the presentation that addressed that directly. But so I'm less concerned than I was. I think the cost issues that have been raised are a significant question. My understanding of ADA requirements is that if they're not 5 foot sidewalks and they require a build out or a turnaround point in that section. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
Okay. So I would be a plus minus, leaning no for the second section.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Meiske?
Well, I agree with my other commissioners in Section 1. Section 2, I agree with 5 foot sidewalk. My wife and I walk. We have a lot of people walking in front of our house side by side, and it gets tight. And, you know, I think an extra foot would help, you know. I know the cost is there, but, you know, what are you going to do? I mean, it's just, do you want to enjoy the walk, or do you want to, you know, and, you know, it costs you a couple extra dollars, or I just think it's needed. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Well, I did. No, I will preface what might be my final comments on this for the evening. I will preface by saying thank you all. I think that's a very good discussion. Certainly what I've heard leaves me split down the middle. Mr. Zur, I may ask you for advice, or if you have any rabbits in a hat or good options. My little informal tally, and we seem to all have somewhat split opinions on it. Personally, my take was, if we're not in favor of Section 2, which we were less in favor of, then I'm going to be the odd man out on the commission. I feel like if we're not going to go with Section 2, then there's also no need for Section 1, because that removing the 1 foot adjacent to the street, in my mind, went right along with the 5 foot. I had a thought earlier, and I think it's maybe just worth a little bit of discussion. I had a thought earlier that, you know, we represent the citizens of Raymore. The building community was not represented. We didn't open a public hearing tonight. It's not actually an amendment. But then I got to thinking, based on the discussion tonight, that, well, they're not the ones that live here. So instead of letting money talk or whatever, I think, you know, frankly, I like the idea of the citizens who live here walk the walks, walk the dogs, take the kids out on bicycles, whatever. I think that's really the priority. Based on the discussion, I'd say, you know, I'm still and I do appreciate the research. I think, you know, the fact that I'm still not sold on the urgency or doing this now, you know, I'm kind of like, and thank you for the word indifferent, but I'm not really indifferent. I don't think that's our word, but conflicted might be a better word. I don't really see a clear case here one way or the other. Commissioner Meiske made the best case for, because he walks, Commissioner Pfizer. But we're missing a couple of commissioners, but you know, we've got 7. That's a more than a quorum. Mr. Zur, any ideas? I mean, what's your advice on how the commission and staff could proceed from where we are?
I don't believe staff is looking for an actual vote from you all this
No,
evening.
no,
I think
not
they
a
were
vote.
simply looking for instruction as to whether or
Recommendation.
not there was a consensus amongst the group about whether or not to come back and present.
Right.
If the group, it sounds to me like the group is not inclined to have staff present again with regard to the 5-foot sidewalk, and I believe they are truly connected. I believe, let me look with staff. Staff appears to be in agreement that the 1-foot provision in the first portion is directly tied to the second as well. So based upon what I am hearing, I don't believe the staff will be presenting this issue back again, at least not under the 29th UDC amendment.
Well, I think it's always kind of dirty to answer a question with a question, but I guess thought that was in my mind was, you know, if staff wants to bring, I mean, you know, all the groundwork is pretty much here. If you want to bring this back as a case, and we'll take a vote on it. I mean, we are missing 2 commissioners. You know, it seems like it's a close call. I'm trying to remember, Mr. Zur. We'd have to have, which way does this one fall? Do we have to have 5 votes for?
I guess I don't know what you're asking for. Are you asking for 5 votes as to whether or not there's instruction to approve, or?
Not tonight. If this were a case tonight, in order to recommend approval of a Unified Development Code change to City Council, we'd have to have at least 5 commissioners in favor, regardless of whether we had 7 or 9 in attendance.
A majority of your commission.
Yeah, so it would take a vote of 5. It's close. I don't know. Staff, I'm kind of tossing the hot potato back in your mind. Do you agree with Mr. Zur's observation that it doesn't sound like we have strong support, Mr. Zur?
On an annual basis, you will go through your UDC review. In fact, I think that's where this is stemmed from.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It could be as simple as directing staff to consider whether or not it's worthwhile to present again at the next
Right.
UDC approval a year from now.
Well, I think, frankly, the way we got where we are is when we were doing the UDC review, we said, sure, let's bring it forward. We'll see how the commission feels. And commission certainly has not been strongly sold on the 5-foot.
And I agree with those comments that Mr. Zur made, and Mr. Chairman, you made. Timing-wise, we can bring this back up for discussion at the June annual review.
Right.
May have a full commission at that point, and just see how the feeling is at that time.
Yeah. Commission, are you okay with that?
That's true, too.
I don't know. I think I would be curious if, you know, with the call it the 2 that are for, and their reasons for being for it, if we were to vote on it, how that would look here, call it next month. Obviously, I don't think we need to go through the whole thing again if we turned it back into a case item, but then just bring it up to vote. I would be okay with that.
I'm certainly okay with that too, but we're inflicting a little bit of pain on staff. It's like how many times?
Well, and I think, you know.
But I agree with you. We wouldn't need a full discussion again.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, you know, when you mentioned the community who we represent, and I would think if we were to, for instance, to poll or let the community vote on how they felt about 4 or 5 feet, my assumption or thought process as I kind of listen to you talk about that was if you brought this to a vote to the community, I would see all the people who walk the sidewalks showing up to vote yes, and very few people who don't use the sidewalk showing up to vote no.
Yeah.
And so I have a feeling that if we were putting the community and what they wanted, or what, if we were to go that route, my inclination is that the community would vote yes. Overwhelmingly, and from that perspective, my vote kind of changes from indifferent to supporting this.
Case would definitely require public hearing here as well as city council.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm kind of looking, I have my view to the left. I'm kind of looking to the right. Shall we bring it up in a month, Mr. Zur?
I'm sorry, I was simply going to insert in there, if you bring it up in a year for the annual UDC review, you may also see changes with regard to those cities that have or have not implemented the additional 5 foot.
And potentially, and I'm not looking at the sheet, but potentially changes on the commission, but we still represent Raymore. Yeah, I don't know. I'm actually okay with either. I'm okay with waiting a year, but I'm also okay with bringing it up in a month. I just really don't want to beat staff back and forth, and Commissioner Arkia was absolutely right. I don't know that there's any need to go through a deep discussion again. I don't have a problem with putting it to a vote, formal vote, and think about it for a month. I'm trying to think, I read the Journal, public notices. With only 1 or 2 exceptions, I have said I value public opinion. It really makes our job easier. Do you think we're going to get a lot of public coming to that public hearing? Could always put the free ice cream sign it. Hey, it worked on the charrettes. Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Armstrong, Commissioner Meiske, Commissioner Wiggins, what do you think? Bring it up for a vote in a month or so? Good? Okay. There's your recommendation. Let's see it as a formal case, and we'll torment you one more time. Sorry. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, I think so. More on that when we get to the pipeline. Yeah, thank you. I thought it was a very good discussion. Hope we didn't just regurgitate, but I think the more we dig, I keep looking for a little glint of something, and I haven't quite hit it yet. All right. Mr. Zur, do you have a city council report for us?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to provide a city council report this evening. Since your last meeting on July 17th, 2018, there have been 2 actual city council meetings, one that occurred on July 23rd and the next one that occurred on August 13th. There is nothing to report with regard to the July 23rd meeting that will not also be reported at the August 13th meeting, so I will focus on it for purposes of this evening. There is relatively limited, so my presentation of a city council report will be brief and probably non-traditional for you. I would note that the 28th UDC amendment is scheduled to be heard by the council at the next city council meeting, so that's the last action that you all took as a commission that will be going before the city council. That will be coming up next week. On the August 13th city council meeting, a couple of items of interest, not necessarily as planning commission members, but as residents of Raymore. The first being the award of a contract which went through for a second reading for the completion of the Hawks Ridge Park amenities. This includes parking, shelters, walking trail, and an amphitheater. Next item that we went through on August 13th was the first reading for setting of the 2018 tax levy. Again, this is solely an interest as residents of Raymore, along with the amendment for schedule of fees, and I don't believe there was any increase this year in any of your tax levies, so congratulations on that. And then the fourth item that I'd report on was an emergency reading with regard to the amendment of the traffic code, and I state this for you simply to make sure that you all maintain compliance when you're driving through town. Their prohibitions have been placed on Elm Street between Madison and Jefferson during school hours as it relates to parking. This was at the request of the school district. It was read on both a first and second reading on an emergency basis on August 13th, 2018. So if your tradition has been to park on Elm Street during school hours, please refrain from doing so. And that concludes my city council report. As you can tell, I was dipping relatively deep to try and find stuff to provide to you this evening.
Yep, we do appreciate that, though. Thank you, Mr. Zer. Mr. Catarat, if you'd go on with the staff report, please.
Thank you, sir. First, I have to apologize to the commission. I do not believe that I included the department's report in your packet. That's why it was at your dais this evening. I apologize for that. Looking at our schedule coming up, we will have a meeting on September 4th. City Manager Jim Feuerborn will be here presenting the 2019 to 2023 capital improvement program, which does require a recommendation from the commission. It is a public hearing. The next meeting, September 18th, we'll have a couple of items on the agenda related to the Raymore Industrial Development proposal. So this was a proposal submitted by Van Trust Real Estate. They are looking to purchase about 136 acres of the Good Ranch. So it would be along Interstate 49, but south of North Cass Parkway. Along the North Cass Parkway will be commercial land. South of that would be where the industrial land has been planned since the Good Ranch was first conceived in 1994. So they're simply moving forward with that phase of the development. They'll be asking to reclassify the zoning. It's currently zoned business park. That zoning was established a few years back. They're looking to reclassify it to planned unit development. Don't want to get into the specifics of the case, but what they are doing is it'd be an industrial planned unit development. So it provides, when you go to planned unit development, it provides some flexibility in some of the standards, and you'll hear all of what that entails as part of that public hearing. They're also submitting, with that planned unit development, is a preliminary plat. They're tied together, so it's really one action by the commission. But they've also submitted a site plan application with that. So they're actually taking it, they're adding steps together, which is certainly fine. They're not going to final plat it, but they're going to look to rezone it, preliminary plat it, and actually site plan as well. So quite a bit on the agenda tied into that project. For your information, we have scheduled a Good Neighbor meeting for next Tuesday, the 28th at 6:30 p.m. We'll be doing that at the Centerview. We're going to pretty heavily advertise that. We sent out a lot of notices, I believe about 170 plus notices to quite an area around this project. We want the public to know what's being proposed because we want to hear from the public on the project. But we'll have that Good Neighbor meeting as required, and of course report to you those findings at your meeting on the 18th. Then looking at our October schedule, it looks like we'll be having meetings in October. We have other cases that are being submitted this week that will be on your October agendas. So going to be an active fall, it looks like, for the commission. So we're excited about that and excited for for your input on those proposals. So that's currently what we have coming before you.
Thank you, Mr. Catarat. And Mr. Rokas, are we open on 155th?
Yes, I know that's probably the only project that people really want to hear about, so I'll just focus in on that. 155th Street was opened as scheduled at the end of July. And if you notice, the roadway has been widened over the bridge. There's a brand new culvert in there, and traffic has been using it. And I hope everybody here has been across it, because there's many questions I've gotten. I figured everybody was just running out there to use it. So,
well, I actually have not. So,
well, maybe tonight could be that night.
I got out of the habit of going that way. So that's specifically why.
And that's probably a good thing, because Phase 3, we put out to bid Phase 3. And we have negotiated with a contractor on how to widen, and that's from Kurzweil to Madison as we overlay it. And we're still working on that process, because it is an area that's not platted. And so that means that it's a prescriptive easement that only where the roadway currently is where we can actually work on the roadway.
Wow.
And so we're working with the adjoining landowners to widen the road, which there's 4 of them to the north side. We've gotten agreements with 3 of them, and we're waiting for the 4th one to even contact us back. And so we're still working on that process to get that completed. And if he would contact us back and come to agreement with us, we would be able to move forward and finish that work. And so when that does happen, we will have to close the road while we do that work. But we're going to meet with the contractor this week to see how long it'll be closed and what hours it'd be closed, if it has to be closed all the time that they're out there. So we're working through that to get that done, but that would finish the project off.
Interesting. Thank you, Mr. Rokos. Open the floor for public comment. If anyone from the public wants to speak, the podium is yours. Just give us your name and address for the record. And seeing no one, I'll open the floor for commission member comment. I'm picking on you all a lot tonight. Commissioner Wiggins, may I start with you?
Staff, again, thank you for all the information that you always put into packets for us. Other than that, I have no comment. Thank you.
Commissioner Armstrong.
I'll follow up on that. Thank you for all the due diligence and the bridge.
Yeah. Commissioner Meiske.
I do enjoy looking at the artwork, by the way. I like that up there, and I hope we continue that. And just to make it official, September 4th, I will not be here. So, okay, that's all.
Vice Chair Fizer.
Well, I have been over the bridge, and I specifically went that way one day because I thought, oh, it's open now. I've got to check it out, and it was nice. I haven't gone that way in a really long time. And I also, when I went to vote last time, I voted at the new rec center at the park, and I thought it was a really nice facility. Of course, I was like examining how the cabinets were attached and things like that because it's what I do. But I thought it was a really good facility. I think it's going to be a really nice addition to our parks system.
Great. Thank you for that. Commissioner Urquia.
Well, Commissioner Fizer stole my thunder on the RAC Center, but that's okay. I was just going to say, congrats on getting that open and in use. It's, to Commissioner Fizer's point, it's great to have. I think it'll be a great addition to the community. I will say on the flip side of that, for those that play disc golf, we're wondering what's going to happen with our course moving forward. It made for a lot more fun tournament that we hosted here in Raymore with all the new paths, because those are considered out of bounds. So that was fun to watch the people who are used to playing the course struggle with the new additions to the park. I'm sorry, that's just an aside. Otherwise, guys, always thank you so much for everything you guys do to help make our job easier as we come together to discuss things and decide what we think is best. So appreciate everything that you do.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor Turnbow.
Commissioner Meiske, with regard to the artwork, we are having a contest for folks within city government and on the commissions and stuff. You can, if you're an artist, you can put something together and we'll display it up there.
I have a hard time slapping.
I really don't have anything this evening, sir. Thank you.
If I can add to that, or maybe you can get me straightened out. So I had read an email from City earlier this evening about that invitation, volunteers on boards and commissions, artwork. What I don't remember for sure was the time frame. It was like had to be submitted by, was it September 15th, on display?
Yeah, I'd have to go to our Facebook page. I don't know.
Late September through early November. It's about a 6-week window.
Yeah, it says the pieces are due the week of September 17th, and the art would be displayed in the gallery from September 24th to November 9th.
Right, and this was actually from someone on a board or commission with some artistic talent. I know we have someone.
It doesn't
paints-
say you have to have artistic talent. It just says that you have to be artistically inclined. So
Okay,
to Commissioner Wiggins' point, if you want to try to slap some paint together, apparently we can, and they will display it. Now, whether or not we should is a whole nother question.
I was thinking Adirondack chairs is about the only painting talent that I know. I do not have much of an artistic gift, but at any rate, I wanted to be sure to mention that. And thank you very much to staff. I think other commissioners said that, so I'll just echo that. Thank you for your patience, your almost infinite patience on some things. Hey, at least it wasn't urban chickens tonight, but I'm sorry. I know that'll come up soon now that I've jinxed us. But do appreciate your support, and still a, Raymore is a growing city. I did note one thing too. You didn't really highlight it, but I think it's one of the metrics that I look at. The number of undeveloped lots available in Raymore, site ready for issuance of a permit for a new home. 2 years ago, we had 702 vacant lots in inventory. A year ago, 508. We had dropped by 200. This year, we're down to 405. We've dropped again. I mean, pure speculation, but it looks like it's about time for some new subdivisions, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and you'll be seeing some very soon.
Oh, well, okay. We'll, no spoilers here tonight, but thank you for that. Thank you all. Unless there's any further matter for the commission, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Meiske, second by Commissioner Urquilla. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 7 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Good night to all, and drive safely.